Since I was 9, I had always seen things a little bit differently than the other kids in my neighborhood. I was the fat, dorky, weird kid that people thought was creepy. The reason for this is because I could see things. Or at least I thought I could see things. Honestly, now thinking back on it, I could have just been imagining things. Anyway, I had always seen this little girl in a light baby blue sundress. She was around my age, I think, and she was more or less pale in the face. I remember she was always silent, but once in a while, she would smile at me. I told my parents, and they didn't believe a word I told them. My dad was a hardcore Baptist. My stepmom was Catholic. So, you can imagine. As I grew up, I started not to see the little girl as much. She would appear randomly, until eventually, not at all. Years passed, and I had been introduced into pagan culture and learning about rituals and magic. A girl I knew, let's call her Debbie, she taught me a lot of things. She was a rather short and stout girl, with a rather large chest, and pretty green eyes. She had a heart-shaped face, and big, pouty lips. Honestly, I was a little bit in puppy love with her. Anyway, she asked me a lot of questions over the years that we had been going to high school together. I moved around a lot. She eventually brought up the topic of ghosts, and I told her about my experiences as a child. When she heard about the little girl, a wicked smile came across her face. She asked me if I wanted to see this little girl again. Curious about how, I said yes. She said she would meet me at my house around 11 that night. Honestly, I had never stayed up that late before. I was afraid my parents might get upset, but I would go through with it anyway. After I got home, I ate supper and waited till dark. My parents always passed out around 9 p.m., so it was just a matter of waiting. I had almost passed out when I had heard something hit my window. I froze for a moment because I was tired, and then got up to loom out the window. Debbie was waiting at the far left corner of the little storage shed we had outside. I moved down the stairs as quickly as I could, making the least amount of noise as I could. I got to the front door without a fuss, and headed around the house and toward Debbie. She had a rather large bag with her, and a half-cocked smile on her lips. She asked me if I was ready, and I nodded. We went inside the storage shed. She started setting up a little area in the middle. She moved a lot of boxes around, and I was too nervous to move at this point. I hadn't ever tried anything like this, and was afraid of what could possibly happen. Moments passed, and she had set up the little area. There was a mat with some diagram painted onto it. Would look like a small black pot, now I know was a cauldron. She had filled it with water bottle she had pulled out of her bag, and then set it on the top of the hot plate she had brought as well. I remained perfectly still and silent as she did all of these things. She pulled out what looked like a few ingredients, random things you may find in a kitchen, and others not so much. Not for sure what all was there, but she had some wolf teeth and a snake skin. The last thing she did was pull out this big leather-bound book that looked older than time itself. It smelled like the leather had rotted, or the pages or something about this aroma of just putrid wetness. I guess you could describe it as. She turned to a page she had bookmarked. She looked at me and started speaking in Latin or something. Honestly, at first, I didn't feel anything, but her voice grew louder and more intense. As it did, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. It was getting colder, and let me state it was midsummer in Texas. So, yeah. As the chanting went on, the overhanging lights flickered. The wind outside seemed to pick up. And then she threw in some of the ingredients. As she did, the walls of the storage building started to shake violently. I started to freak out, yelling at her to stop, but she kept at it, adding more stuff to the cauldron and chanting. After a few more rounds of chanting, she stopped, and the lights went out. I wanted to scream, but before I could, I was frozen in a terror at what I had heard. Demonic giggling filled the room, and I bolted out the door and toward the house. That wasn't the little girl. That was something else. The rest of the night was in a haze. I don't remember all that happened after I bolted. I was in such shock I woke up the next day in the living room, under the coffee table. After that day, I became a little bit more aware of the supernatural, and learned to never trust an unskilled practitioner in the field of witchcraft. So when I was little, I thought I woke up, but I couldn't move anything except my eyes. Suddenly, I heard my bedroom door creak open. And I saw a shadowy figure enter the room. The shadowy figure laughed. It was a man laughing. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. As the man came closer to me, I saw he had no face, and his hands were bloody. The man stopped by my bed and took out a knife from his pocket. He raised his right hand, and I knew he was going to stab me. Suddenly, I woke up to my parents screaming, "What happened? Are you okay?" I told them what happened. My mother told me I had experienced sleep paralysis. I was so scared I did not go to school for 3 days. This was the only time I experienced sleep paralysis, and I hope to never experience it again. I lived in the country when this happened. I was 16 years old when it began. It was shortly after my parents bought me a car for me to get around without them having to drive me to all my functions. I was in different sports, dance, and cheerleading activities. Anyway, one night, I was going for a short drive to get some donuts for everybody. I went out to my car, and when I sat inside, I noticed something. It was a huge handprint on the windshield right in front of the driver's seat. The fingers were extra long and had dots at the end, like the tips of claws. The oddest thing was that there were 6 fingers instead of 5. It had 4 long digits and 2 shorter thumb-like fingers on either side of them. The print was much larger than that of any man. It was distracting, so I got out to wipe it off. It didn't get wiped away in spite of my best efforts. I got back in the car, confused as to why I couldn't wipe it off. Then, I tried to wipe it off with my finger from inside the car, and the print was actually made within the car. Someone, or something, had to have been in the car that night. I did not see the print earlier when I drove home from school. I wiped it off with a paper napkin. and I just figured it had to be something that only looked like a handprint, because nothing could be that big, with 6 fingers no less. Nothing happened for at least a month later, and I totally forgot about the handprint. Then, one night, as I laid sleeping, I was awoken by tapping on the window, right above my headboard, over my head. It sounded like someone was tapping something hard, like a screwdriver on the window. I ignored it, but knew it couldn't be a tree or anything like that, because that window was all alone. 10 minutes later or so, I heard it again. This time, when I opened my eyes, I saw a huge shadow go across the room, like the entire window was blocked from the moonlight as someone passed by. That window was maybe 8 feet from the ground outside. To block out the entire window, someone had to be at least 9 feet tall. I knew I wasn't dreaming, and I was too scared to look, so I just laid there until I fell asleep. My mom and brother did not believe me the next day. They looked at each other when I told them about it in the morning, like I was crazy or something. I checked outside later, where the window is, and there wasn't any evidence. I did see 4 scratch marks on the wood by the garage. My brother said it was a raccoon, but it seemed awfully high to me for it to be a raccoon to reach there. So, months later, I'm doing some homework at the kitchen table. It is only like 8 or 9 o'clock. I hear the tapping on the kitchen window behind me. The first thing that came to my mind was it was my boyfriend, so I turned and looked quickly. What I saw scared the hell out of me. It all happened so fast that I can't even be sure of what I saw. But I thought I saw 2 giant red eyes for just a tiny split second. They were gone before I could even get a direct look at the window. I saw this in my peripheral vision. As I was turning to look at the window, again, this window is at least 8 feet from the ground outside, and the eyes went upward as they moved, like the thing looking in was actually bending down to see through the window. I called my boyfriend, who was so sweet, he came right over, but he didn't find anything. No footprints or any indication that anything was there at all. He said maybe it was an owl. I just nodded because I didn't want to be argumentative, and that sounded good to me, even though there was really no place for an owl to stand. Other things happened as well. One morning, I woke up and found dried up leaves around my bed. I had no idea how they could have got there, but figured it was my brother. He denied it and laughed at me when I asked him about it. Fast forward, and now I am a 19-year-old and away at college. Nothing happened my first year at college. I got a small apartment for my second year, and one morning, as I was going to class, I get in the car and notice the handprint, this time on the passenger side window. A huge hand with 6 fingers and tips like claws.